Parents, this is a very important video. I'm going to tell you what you need to do to keep your family together and to keep yourself out of prison in the years to come. Because the Scottish Government is trying to change the legal definition of child abuse. I'll read you what it is at the moment. Cruelty, it's called. So, willfully ill-treats, neglects, abandons or exposes to risk him in a manner likely to cause him unnecessary suffering or injury to health, including injury to or loss of sight or hearing or limb or organ of the body or any mental derangement. That sounds pretty serious stuff, doesn't it? But they want to do away with that and have a new definition that includes emotional abuse. And they give some examples to try and explain what they mean by emotional abuse. They say to illustrate the level of seriousness of the behaviour that we consider should be reflected in any revised offence. So these things to come are things to illustrate the seriousness of behaviour that should be covered in the legal definition of child abuse. Okay, here we go. I'm going to tell you what they are. Then at the end of each one, I'm going to give you some advice on how to avoid committing these crimes and therefore keep your family together and keep yourself out of prison. First one, yelling and screaming. Right, what they actually mean there basically is shouting. So if your 4-year-old knocks over the tin of paint while you're decorating and you've told them 5 times not to touch it and you shout, "I told you not to do that." Or if your 10-year-old swears at mum and dad shouts, "How dare you speak to your mother like that?" Well, that's child abuse. So advice how to avoid that one. What you need to say is, "Can we talk about this, please? I really don't think that was acceptable behaviour." Maybe practice it in the mirror a few times every day. You'll be fine. Right, the next part of the definition of child abuse, to curse. Now, swearing at kids, that's not a great thing to do, I don't think, but that's the way a lot of people talk. Kids can be really annoying, people get annoyed, and it's going to happen. And it's not necessarily abuse. Advice. If you're someone that's in the habit of swearing a lot, I recommend that you get your kids earplugs. Right, next part of the definition of child abuse. The adult may swing from rage to warmth to rage. Well, when I hear that, I just think, well, that's life. That's probably more an indication of a parent struggling, going through a stressful time than anything else. But the Scottish Government expects parents to be like robots. The kids can be as disobedient and provocative as they like, but the parents have got to maintain perfect equanimity. My advice, I don't know, take up meditation or something. Right, the next part of the definition of child abuse. Ridicule the child. So when a child whines and you imitate their whiny voice to try and teach them about how they're sounding, well, that's child abuse. If they're a bit full of themselves, making fun of them a little bit just to bring them down to size a little bit, that would be child abuse. Right, my advice in those situations, you need to sit down with the children for a quick counselling session instead. Don't use humour. How do you feel about the voice you were using when you asked for a third ice cream for the 5th time? Follow that, you should be fine. Right, push them away. If you push a child away, that's emotional abuse. So if you're sitting there on the sofa with your hot drink, little kiddie comes charging up to you and tries to dive on you and climb up you, likely to knock the drink all over you, all over them. Well, my advice is, just let them crawl all over you whenever they like. It's better to be scolded than prosecuted. Right, next one. It's child abuse to make them feel they are useless. So when you're painting the front door, 3-year-old comes along and says, "Can I help please? I'd like to do some painting." And you say, "I think you're a bit too young to help with this job. You go and play instead." The 3-year-old might feel useless. Notice, feel useless. So it's not to do anything objective, it's to do with the way they feel. My advice to avoid this crime, just let them help. Better have a mess, paint everywhere, than be arrested. Right, the next one. It's child abuse if the child is made to feel worthless. Again, emphasis, feel worthless. So if a 14-year-old daughter says she feels worthless because you won't buy a horse, well, that's tough. You can't argue with feelings. Advice, well, I can't really offer any advice here. You can't control kids' feelings, but I suppose in the case of the horse, just buy them the horse. Okay, the next one. It's child abuse. If the adult may seem irritated by the existence of the child. Irritated by children. Now, children can certainly be pretty irritating, but the sort of people that write this drivel, they would never admit that. They're such nice people. They love children so much that they'd never dream of being irritated by a child. So what's the difference between being irritated with a child and being irritated by the existence of the child? I don't know. Who can tell? It's got to seem like it as well. So who knows who makes that judgment, but you need to avoid being irritated just to play safe. What's my advice? My advice is when you're irritated with a child, don't show it at all and pretend that you aren't. Sorry, that's the best I can do. Right, next one. It's child abuse if you make the child feel that their opinions are worthless. So, I want to go to the cinema tonight. No. You need to stay in and finish that project that's due tomorrow. Right, but if you say no to your kids, you really are skating on thin ice. If they feel that their opinions are worthless, then you've committed child abuse. You may think you've been perfectly reasonable, but it's all to do with their feelings. Advice, just let them go. Bow to every request. Better than having your family broken up and your children taken into care. Right, next one. It's child abuse to make the child feel that their feelings are worthless. So if a kid cries because they don't get some sweeties, if you say to them, oh, come on, don't make a fuss about something silly like that, you're doomed. Now, you've got no defense against this. Look at the way it's worded. It's the way they feel about their feelings. It's doubly subjective. You've got no chance. Advice, just pander to every manifestation of emotion and challenge nothing. So if they cry because they don't get sweeties, say to them, that must be so tough for you. I really understand why you're so upset. And I think you'll probably be okay. Right, next one. It's child abuse to expose the child to antisocial role models. So if Big Brother's a bit wild, I don't know, just make sure they don't see each other. In some families, that might be quite hard to do. There might be quite a few characters that might fit that description. Maybe one way you could try and solve this would be to move to a really, really nice neighbourhood and to find the perfect school with no antisocial role models in it. Unfortunately, the perfect school doesn't exist, and maybe you can't afford to move into a really nice neighbourhood, and they're not perfect in any case. So advice for this one, I don't know, just good luck. Next one. It's child abuse to expose the child to anger. Now, actually, it's quite right to be angry with kids sometimes, and it's right to let them know it. It's part of learning how to get along with people. Kids need to learn what makes people angry. But we've got to put all that aside. The law's the law. So what's my advice? If you're angry with a kid, bottle it up, be nicey while fuming inside, and then take it out on someone else later. Right, the next one. It's child abuse to reward a child for bigotry. I mean, what on earth does that mean? Is that, for example, paying the kids to go and write offensive slogans on the local Indian takeaway? Laughing at their joke about Muslims? I don't know. My advice here is simple. Every time a child brings up anything to do with religion, LGBT, race, nationality, have a card in your pocket, take it out, and read the following sentences from it. We don't talk about such things in this family. Equality and diversity is at the heart of all we do. Right, the next one. The next part of the crime of child abuse. This is the pièce de résistance. This takes you to a whole other level. I've read this to a lot of people around Scotland recently, and people usually find it difficult to believe that this is what's been proposed. So this is child abuse. How about this? A father will talk to child A about child B and say how he's upset with child B because child B said some terrible things about child A. Child A will then be angry with child B for hurting her feelings and also for making the father sad. Child A and child B will rarely discuss the incident because the parent has set up the children to distrust one another. Right, I don't really understand that. But anyway, advice, don't talk to your kids. So you can see this new proposed definition of child abuse. It contains all of this subjective, emotional mush. It's hugely vague. Even where these behaviours are present to an extreme degree, often the law's not going to help. The trauma of splitting up a family, of removing children, is so huge that the abuse needs to be really significant before it's worse than breaking up a family. But the culture in Scotland is all driven by the same ideas through education, through social work, through politics. Children are vulnerable, they're delicate flowers. It's the Shannorification effect. Well-being is the thing, which just means pretty well happiness. It's not about resilience. The slightest discomfort will damage a child for life, irreparable damage. The secret to bringing children up is to maintain them in a state of perpetual happiness. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job, even it's abuse. You've also got to bear in mind with this. This is from the people who are completely against the whole idea of punishing children. So the idea of doing anything to children that makes them unhappy in order to teach them a lesson, they're against that. That comes through in this definition as well. The other thing coming through is this feeling, you see the named person scheme, lots of other ways as well. Parents are a bit useless. The amateurs, the professionals know exactly how to deal with children, how to speak to them in every situation, how to be the extra perfect adult. And maybe in the social work world, they're used to dealing with some parents who might be failing quite dramatically. But overall, that's not true. Parents know best about how to bring up their own kids in the vast majority of cases. Right, as we see with the named person scheme, it's based on the idea that intervening in family life for smaller and smaller issues is a good thing. It used to be abuse or neglect. It's now just well-being concerns, and well-being just means making them unhappy. But what they're doing now is they're actually redefining abuse to make abuse into things just to do with well-being as well. So it's lowering and lowering the bar at which the state intervenes in family life, and upping the severity with which it intervenes. Whereas intervening with a well-being concern, might be a social work named person type thing, but this is elevating a lot of things that are really well-being concerns, and it's elevating them and treating them as child abuse. Another idea coming through is the whole children's equality, empowering children. So the parents will be put on the back foot because they'll be worried about this. The kids will be taught about it at school. They'll be taught how adults are supposed to treat them. They're already taught that. It'll become even more intensive. They'll be taught what constitutes abuse, and they'll be ready on the trigger, some kids at least, to accuse their parents of it or to use it to exert power over their parents, because they'll know the little phrases to put in, the buttons to push, to put their parents on the back foot and to make the parents a little bit worried and to give the kids their own way. Because these people think in Scotland, they look at the massive discipline problems in school and they think the problem is that children need to be given more power and adults need to have their authority diminished. How they come to that conclusion, I'm not sure, but that's the conclusion that they come to. There'll be charities, there'll be PSHE lessons in schools where they'll be going through this definition with children, priming them and telling them how to report adults, I wonder who they could be, who don't quite do it right. Now, of course, if we had someone here to defend this new definition, they'd be saying, oh, it doesn't mean that at all. Oh, you're being so silly. It doesn't mean those things at all. And yet the answer's got to be the same. Well, if it doesn't mean those things, don't say it. It was the same with the smacking ban. You'd say, why do you want to criminalise people for using a form of discipline that's been effective 100 years? Most adults in Scotland think it's effective and necessary. So, it's not about punishing people. It's not about criminalising anyone. Which is either that they fail to understand the way the criminal operates, or they're just lying. I'm not sure which it is. But you get the same sort of answer with this, oh no, that's not what we really mean. If it's not what you really mean, don't put it in your definition. Because once it's there, it's open to interpretation, and ordinary everyday parenting could come under the descriptions that you've given. So there's a real shift in the balance of power that the Scottish Government is trying to effect through lots of means to undermine parental authority and to embolden children in disputes with their parents. And the state is ready to intervene on the side of their children, putting parents perpetually on the back foot. Is that going to make children happy? Is that going to enhance their well-being? Once the kids have got the parents wrapped around their little fingers, is that happy kids? Or out of control kids happy? Or are kids that live in well-disciplined homes that are under control, is that where the kids are happier? I think it is. Now you can add this to the huge human rights emphasis that kids are exposed to in schools. I've heard various stories about it. I just heard one the other day. I think it was maybe a 13-year-old girl. The parents said, look, you've got to tidy your room. We keep saying you're not doing it. If you don't do it, we're going to take your phone off you for a couple of days. You can't do that. That's against my rights. I've got human rights, And that's exactly the way they're taught at school. And alongside that, we've got the Scottish Government doing away with the very concept of parents' rights. Currently, the law refers to parental rights and responsibilities. The Scottish Government would like to do away with the idea of parental rights. So parents just have responsibilities. They've got a job to do. They've got duties to perform. And it's children who have all the rights. Now, if I had my way, this would be question 1 of First Minister's questions, because it's appalling and it's an extremely important issue. But the parties at Holyrood, it'll barely even register with them. It'll float through all the committees without any serious objection, and it will be implemented in law. And families and children will suffer. The ones affected directly through the families being destroyed through spurious accusations and trivial cases, but also there'll be the general change to the ethos of interactions between adults and children in Scotland, in particular parents and their kids. And we as the Scottish Family Party want to get into Holyrood to change this. We want to put this sort of issue at the top of the agenda, where currently it never is. Right, I hope you find that interesting. Do subscribe to our channel. We're a political party. You can join us. There's a link below. Thanks for watching.